Hello team and welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MSP. This is Ukraine War Frontline update for the 26th of June 2023. Sorry this is a little bit delayed. Real life got in the way, had to go to the tip. Anyway, that's irrelevant. Let's go to the northeast sector, the Kupiansk to Svatova to Kreminna frontline. On the war map, it looks like this in the northeast sector of the front line, this axis from Kupiansk to Svatova to Kreminna. Okay, so what has happened? Well, in all honesty, not a lot in this area. We'll go to the ISW, Institute for the Study of War, American military think tank. That gives us a little bit of an indication of what has been taken place. And it says continued limited ground attacks northwest of Svatova. Russian MOD claimed that Russian forces repelled 4 Ukrainian attacks near Karmazinivka, Yampolivka, and Dubrova. So 4 attacks in those 3 places. That's not really talking about Kupiansk, this area where the Russians have made some advances, just around the Liman-Pershi-Sinkivka area. Not heard anything about that. And then some of these other places, oops, going the wrong way there. Because Karmazinivka there, repelled attack, and then Torska, Dubrova, this kind of area as well. Russians sources speculated that Ukrainian forces struck Luhansk city with Storm Shadow cruise missiles. So Luhansk has been hit. There's just an addition there. Doesn't get hit as much as other places. It is behind the line somewhat, but there will be important logistical nodes there, no doubt. Right, as we come further down south, we bypass Bilohorivka, Sperna. Doesn't seem to be any talk about those places, and onto Vasily and Bakhmut area as a whole, where there has been considerable activity there yesterday. Now, to give you a reminder of my maps, they are all the lines represent the Russian defensive lines. The blue represents Andrew Perpetua, pro-Ukrainian mapper. Red represents Suryat Mat's pro-Russian mapper. And the yellow in the Bakhmut and Adiivka area represents Deep State Map, a pro-Ukrainian mapper. Deep State Map is 48 to 72 hours behind a lag due to operational security, and in fact shows no changes for the areas that I use them for at the moment over the last 24 hours. In fact, there's very limited changes shown with regard to Bakhmut. We'll come on to a little bit of a change down there for Suryat maps, but actually it's almost certain that the Ukrainians have made much greater advance around all areas of Bakhmut. So if we go to what is well, actually let's go to Rebar, pro-Russian source, to talk about everywhere on the way to Bakhmut. So talks first of all in the offensive of Russian units near Kreminna continues. As a result of successful actions, the control zone at Serebyanska Forestry and in the direction of Torska has been expanded. No real detail about that. Taking advantage of Russian internal problems, the Ukrainians tried to go on the offensive in the Soledar direction. Several attacks were successfully repelled near Vasily as well as Sako Ivanseti. And that's pretty much all they have to say for the entire eastern front line. That Sako Ivanseti and Vasily are here. The Ukrainians have had some success taking back some area around Yakovlivka. Haven't seen much activity around Sako Ivanseti for a few weeks. Ukrainians did make some gains there previously, but actually, according to the Ukrainians, there's far more activity than what Rebar alludes to there. So let's go to see some of these other sources. Here's a whole Donetsk front line as according to War Mapper, and you can see that according to them, Ukrainians have made some gains in the Torska area, despite what Rebar says, and in the Serebyansky Forestry area as well. So that goes against the Rebar narrative, but I'm not sure. I haven't heard of Ukrainian gains in those places to confirm what War Mapper is saying, to be honest, there. And then gains to the south of Bakhmut, quite considerable gains down there. And then some gains elsewhere, south of Marinka, which is interesting. That's in the possibly Pobieda area, maybe a bit further south. We'll come on to that later. And then around the Velika Novosilka area of the Donetsk front. So a lot of activity and some in Bakhmut there, as you can see. Well, let's go to see what Hanna Maliar, the Deputy Defense Minister, says. At the end of last week, we started counteroffensive actions in the areas of Orikova, Vasilivka, Bakhmut, Bodanivka, Yahidne, Klishchivka, and Kodiamivka. Let's put all of those on a map. What they were doing is taking advantage of the chaos, it seems. I don't know if they had this planned already. They might well have done. it might have been just happy coincidence, but it seems like they're trying to take advantage of the Russian confusion with the Prigozhin mutiny that was taking place, given that apparently Wagner still have some forces in the area. And indeed, according to reporting from Ukraine, there was some infighting between Wagner elements and the Russian conventional MOD forces behind the lines here. So this is a good time to attack, and as claimed, there's activity around Orikova, Vasilivka, Bodanivka, Yahidny, and then Klishchivka, and then down to Ozeryanivka, Kurdyamivka area. So all of those areas, and Bakhmut itself saw activity by all accounts. Now, she said, in each of the directions, we advanced 1 to 2 kilometers. Now, the troops are entrenched at their achieved boundaries and continue to destroy the enemy. So that is a 1 to 2 kilometer advance. We're not really seeing that on the maps yet, but that's not surprising due to operational security. And just, you don't always get confirmatory videos coming out straight away. Sometimes it takes a day or two for these videos to come out. Not because of operational security, just the nature of it is, and of how it is, and people then needing to geolocate them, so on and so forth. Ukraine advances up to 1 kilometer in Bakhmut direction, says the Kyiv Independent. Ukrainian forces advance from 600 to 1,000 meters, so slightly less than what Hanna Maliar is claiming, on the flanks of the strategic city of Bakhmut. I argued this morning that it's not really intrinsically strategic. This is what I've always said. There's no value in and of itself. The value for Bakhmut is in fixing troops so that they can't fight elsewhere and attriting troops. Anyway, the flanks of Bakhmut, a spokesperson for the Eastern Command of Ukrainian Forces, Cherevati, has reported. Furthermore, this is coming predominantly from reporting from Ukraine. Euromaidan always summarize their videos on a daily basis. The rapid and peaceful reconciliation between the Russian Defense Ministry and the Wagner Group arouses suspicion and speculation about troop redeployment, while Ukrainian forces make significant advancements on the battlefield, particularly around Bakhmut. And this is a screenshot really from the video that shows that there were gains. It talks a lot about what's happened in the south of Bakhmut. So Bakhmut is there. It doesn't really talk about the northern areas in the reporting from Ukraine video, but there are these forestry areas that the Ukrainians have had some gains with, and forcing the Russians across the canal. The last vestiges of Russian forces to the west of the canal have been pushed to the east, and it even hints at attacks over the canal into Kurdyamivka and Ozeryanivka. Okay, no report says in addition, Ukrainian soldier with the call sign Osman fighting in Klishchivka said that 1/3 of the Klishchivka forest is under Ukrainian control, as there are 3 forest strips around Klishchivka. It's not clear where this is exactly. Either way, they are close. And then furthermore, no report says 3rd Separate Assault Brigade cleared all Russian remnants of the 57th Motorized Rifle Brigade west of the Donbass Canal. So this is further to the south near, as I say, Kurdyamivka. Confirmed by the 3rd SAB Commander Biletsky. He reported yesterday, and I reported that 50 wounded and 30 dead Russian soldiers, and that particular unit was pretty much destroyed out of existence. UA forces have advanced into one of the Klishchivka forest strips outlined there. I don't know if that's the one he's definitely sure of, because he was unsure in a previous video. So in a previous tweet, sorry. This is this forest strip there. You can see. Then it's a case of fighting for the trenches that are on the elevated ground just to the northwest of Klishchivka. So this kind of goes downhill, and this sits kind of below the bluff, if you like, and the trenches are on top of that hill. So there's another forest area there, and I think there's a forest area up here as well. So it's not definitely this forest here, but that's the indication from no reports. Could be that Ukrainians have control of that, which then means they can try and encircle these entrenchments that are in place above Klishchivka. Okay, and then on to Suryat Maps, who also agrees that the Ukrainians have pushed the Russians back in the Klishchivka area, although not as close. So this is actually an omission of stuff that took place about 2 days ago, as far as my other mappers are concerned, and I changed that. Both Deep State and Andrew Perpetua had those gains there. This illustrates Suryat Maps just catching up a tiny bit. only moving them forward a little bit in line really with deep state. But remember, deep state map is 48 to 72 hours behind. So it's likely that Surat Maps is being generous to the Russians there. It says that the Ukrainians retook the latest positions west of the water canal as well, and new positions west of Klishchivka. So this again, that happened pretty much 2 days ago. I reported that yesterday and showed that change yesterday, and they are kind of lagging behind. And I don't know whether that's some genuine kind of issues with sources or whatever, or whether it's when the Ukrainians do better, they're less likely to rush to make those changes. It's a kind of like fitting in with your biases and whatnot. So anyway, now all three mappers agree that the Russians are definitely not to the west of this canal, and that it could be attacks. There were rumors reported from Ukraine, as I said this, that there could be fighting in the outskirts of Kupiansk-Kreminna, possibly even Ozarianivka as well. So some good gains for the Ukrainians. I'm not sure about what's happening in the city, but we reported a couple of days ago that there are a couple of roads that were taken, possibly in this Dacha area. The Ukrainians have control over the area around the statue, the MiG statue in the southwestern corner of Bakhmut. So they still have presence there. Indeed, if you're being technical, the Russians have never actually taken Bakhmut, despite what they may have claimed, although the Ukrainians really were pushed to the last couple of streets. So that's what's taking place in Bakhmut. The ISW states, and I broadly talked about all of this, so I won't read it all to you, just dip into the couple of points. General Staff reported a relatively higher number of Russian offensive operations near Bakhmut than over the past few days, and stated that Russian forces unsuccessfully attacked Bakhmut near Rozdolivka, so that's to the north, and Vasily to the north, and then all these other places. But that's claiming that the Russians were attacking. Well, actually, it appears that the Ukrainians were doing the attacking, really. The Russian MOD claimed that units of the southern group of forces repelled Ukrainian attacks, and again, in a number of places, it seems. Bakhmut, in the Bakhmut area, and destroyed a Russian bridgehead in an unspecified area of the western bank of the Sversky Donbass Canal. Well, that may be unspecified, but we know pretty much it's there. I mean, that's the only place they were at. So that bridgehead has now been taken, and that's an omission from the Russians as well. Okay, then it goes on to talk about Adiivka, so we'll move on to there. That's the end of the Bakhmut area. Right, so on to Adiivka. We come out on my map further down south, and again we have the three lines, the three different colors indicating the different mappers. There's been claims of a few different places. This is again, I think Surat Maps admitting that there is some changes north of Vodyanye. War Mapper shows a couple of gains here. So War Mapper being a bit more current, it seems, than they have previously been. They don't usually rely on them for up-to-date stuff. They seem to do more overall maps that lag a couple of days. But actually, recently, they've been throwing in some of these to show some successes for the Ukrainians here, just by Pervomaisky, and here by Vodyanye. Surat Maps has the Vodyanye gains from the Ukrainians here, calling it a map correction made, showing Ukraine retaking control over some of the trench line north of Vodyanye during the last week. So that's to say that it might not have happened yesterday, but it's a correction over the last week. And then there was, well, we go to the ISW, they say the Ukrainian military sources reported that Russian forces attacked Ukrainian positions in Adiivka and Marinka directions, and that 13 combat clashes took place near Marinka in the past day. Geolocated footage posted on June the 24th and 25th shows that Ukrainian forces have made marginal advances on the northern outskirts of Donetsk city, just south of Adiivka and between Pisky and Pervomaisky. Okay, so this is this area here. It appears that Ukrainians have made gains there, is the claim. It's not really borne out by what they reference there. So the reference is to this video of the Ukrainians, or not this video. There is another video where the Ukrainians are, unless it's below. There's a video of them firing shells, the Russians firing shells and dropping leaflets, a classic kind of information war, where you drop leaflets on the opposition. I don't really think that's worth doing to the Ukrainians. I'm pretty sure they're not going to be convinced by a bunch of leaflets dropped by the Russians at this point in the war. So those were more over here into the area north of Spartak, and Russians had made some gains here north of Opitny and apparently in the Spartak area as well. So they're dropping leaflets in this area, but that doesn't show. That was literally the reference that ISW gave for showing marginal gains, and I don't think it does. But there have been gains in where they're talking about between Pisky and Pervomaisky, as according to several mappers here. So that is in this area. Andrew Perpetua had previously the map sort of coming down here and like that. So it's quite a considerable area. There's been a long fight over this very sort of long and thin settlement of Pervomaisky as it comes into to Pisky down here. So it's a long, thin settlement that's taken Russia months and months and months to make really marginal advances. And it seems that the Ukrainians have pushed back quite considerably over the last week. And they are showing some serious gains there, as according to Andrew Perpetua. That is then confirmed by the claims in ISW, but the reference they use to support that claim is actually the other side of Adiivka. So I don't know if that's just a genuine mistake of theirs. And I don't think that even those geolocations represent advances. That's been Ukrainian for some time. So anyway, there, as I say, there are successes here for Adiivka. Adiivka has been a difficult place for both sides. It's a real meat grinder, has been for some months, and Ukrainians will certainly welcome some success on that front. As we come further to the south, a lot of activity around Marinka, as according to the ISW, but no great details about that, other than the details of this reported withdrawal. So that's Prigozhin having that mutiny, and then some of the troops. So, for example, the Akhmat, the Chechen troops, were withdrawn from certain places to go and support the Chechens other Chechens as they tried to harry the Wagner mercenaries because they took the side of Putin. Anyway, ISW says the details of this reported withdrawal are unclear, but some contingent of Bakhmut and other special forces may have departed from Marinka to Rostov Oblast in order to guard against the Wagner group's rebellion. So there are reports that I guess the Russians will be weaker there as a result of not having the support of the Chechens. Whether they'll come back though, I don't know. They're obviously they won't stay in Rostov-on-Don twiddling their thumbs, I don't think. But then, they are TikTok warriors. They might just do a few more videos. Okay, there is activity around Vuhledar, but it's pretty unspecified. If we look in the ISW, there are claims that the Russian forces conducted limited ground attacks there. And, from both sides. Well, actually, no, Russian sources claim that. And then Russian mill blogger claimed that as well. So, near the outskirts of Vuhledar. So I don't know much more than that. So we'll come to the west now. So leave Vuhledar and look at what's taking place in and around Velika Novosilka. And to be honest, I was going to say not a lot. There seems to be pretty much, more of the same taking place here. Like trying to force their way into Staromayorska and to take Rivnepil. That's the Ukrainians. However, literally just now, there's news that Rivnepil has fallen to the Ukrainians. The Ukrainians have liberated Rivnepil. So to the front, Velika Novosilka axis. This was earlier. Ukrainian troops advanced to the flanks from Levadny and Storozheve, and that Rivnepil is still controlled by the Russians. And the Russians tried to counterattack in the Makarivka and sort of Priutne, Rivnepil areas. The Ukrainians attacking from Storozheve and Levadny, but it seems now that Rivnepil has fallen. No report saying Rivnepil is liberated by Ukrainian forces. This was stated by Deputy Minister of Defense Anna Malia. So I need to change my maps to reflect that. And that is now under Ukrainian control. And that puts, as you can see here, the Russian control line just north of Priutne, going along to Staromayorska, as according to no reports. So that would put the line really going across there. this whole salient appears to be either grey zone or controlled by Ukrainians. There is geolocated evidence of this. Soldiers of the 31st Mechanized Brigade raise a flag of Ukraine in Rivnepil. That is significant. They've been trying to take that for some time now. And no reports then later says the 46th indicated earlier that Rivnepil would be abandoned by the Russians' 394th Regiment if the AFU was successful towards Staromayorsk, creating conditions for encirclement. Now that Rivnepil has been liberated, things might speed up near Staromayorsk. So that's to say that Staromayorsk is looking pretty vulnerable, given that Rivnepil was kind of helping to defend it, at least from one of its flanks. You can now see the Ukrainians trying to get around the side in between Pryutne and Staromayorsk. That would enable both of those settlements to be somewhat more vulnerable by being flanked and almost encircled. So Staromayorsk would then be potentially encircled from three sides, and you'd see that being taken as well. And it's all about getting closest to Staromilnivka. It's around here. It's just after there, I think, that the major trench lines start to appear, and they will be certainly very challenging for the Ukrainians. The Russians have defended here with troops quite quite robustly. They've sent a lot of reserves into this area. This has been a really useful, I would say, project for the Ukrainians in terms of fixing the Russian reserves here, exhausting the Russian forces, and attriting them to a point where they will become weaker now going forward. There will be thinner defenses. These trenches will be more thinly defended. I was questioning the wisdom of Russia expending a lot of resources in defending these places rather than trying to sit back and soak up the pressure in the trenches. But then this could talk to how they might not be as confident in the trenches and those fortifications, so they didn't necessarily want to do that. I don't know. Anyway, so that's really good news on the Donetsk front. Then, in fact, let's go to Rebar. It says in that salient, the enemy, with the support of armored vehicles, launched an offensive on Rivnepil and Pryutne. Russian troops steadily hold the defense, repelling the AFU attacks. Fighting carries on in the front line, except not anymore, as they have lost that. So then, fierce fighting is going on in the Orikhiv sector, where the enemy managed to advance a little bit further in the direction of Robotyne. So we'll go to there next. So good success there, and we'll see how that develops throughout the day. Whether the Ukrainians can gather some momentum and continue pushing, or whether they just slowly consolidate and bite off little chunks, piece by piece. So you've got Marfapil, Drozhnyanka. I haven't heard anything about those for some times. And then gains, apparently, according to Suryat maps, in this Zaporizhia area. I showed you this last night in my extra, but this was the claim that the Ukrainians recaptured positions recently lost south of H08 and the new ones north of Robotyne. So there is still that kind of salient up here, this small bridgehead for the Russians, but it doesn't appear on all maps. So Andrew Perpetua, for example, doesn't have the Russians controlling that area. And actually, if we go to look at Wargonzo, whether it's actually Wargonzo or one of his team, you can see that just north of Robotyne is pretty flat for quite some time. So actually, that really doesn't track very well with Suryat maps. So that would look more like this. Okay, so it's unlikely that Russia control pretty much any of this area there. I think this would all be at least grey zone, and I think Andrew Perpetua is probably far more accurate there with the mapping. And in fact, we have heard that they were on the outskirts of Robotyne, or 1.5 kilometers north of the center of Robotyne, and that was 1.5 days ago, I think, at least. So if you're talking about 1.5 kilometers, that's there from the center, which is basically the outskirts of Robotyne. So there's a very good chance that the Russians and Ukrainians are fighting in and around Robotyne itself. If we go to the ISW, Russian sources claimed. Oh no, that goes on to Piatikhetki. yeah, it says Russian sources claim that Russian forces repelled a Ukrainian attack near Robotyne and Novopokrovka. So Novopokrovka is just to it's Novopokrovka. Yeah, so up here. So in this area there. So that's to the northeast of Robotyne. So yeah, lots of activity there. We'll see how uh, that develops today. Certainly gains for the Ukrainians there. And then not a lot's come out of Pyatikhatki for a couple of days now. Some Russian sources still claim that there's fighting over that. But even if you look at Rebar's slight change of wording now, to the west near Pyatikhatki, Russian troops proceed to control the heights around the village. So they're not claiming that they are contesting the village now, not allowing the airfield to accumulate forces for attacks. Whereas, Syriac Maps has Russian control of, oops, it's not behaving well, Russian control of most of the village, right? So Rebar would say, no, they're in the heights around there, around the village, which would really much better align with Andrew Perpetua's mapping there. Let's go to the ISW that says Russian sources claim that neither side controls Pyatikhatki, although ISW has not observed footage suggesting that Ukrainian forces have lost control of the settlement since they captured it on June 19th. So that's 7 days ago. The ISW is saying, despite all of these claims that the Russians are making, there's no geolocated footage, no evidence that they ever did retake Pyatikhatki. So just bear that in mind when you are evaluating whether to believe the Russian claims or not, and whether whose side is more reliable. I think that's probably a good indication. Although it has been contested, I'm not denying that the Russians have been fighting over that for sure. Right. That is the front line as far as a reservoir, but actually we now have a bit of an addition to add to the front line, which is the Antonovsky Bridge area down the Dnipro River by Kherson. Where are you? Here we are. So we've got Kherson here, and we have the Antonovsky Bridge, which I think is this one. So I'm going to show you some footage that appears to show activity taking place around here. So you've got the bridge starts sort of back here, or the on-ramp onto the bridge, and you've got areas around here. I mean, it all looks quite nice and green and full of trees. Not so much these days, right? There is a lot of activity for the Ukrainians in this area. So let's go to see what the claims are. So so a more recent update is now convincingly requesting air support, and I shared this with you in the news piece this morning. To assist in destroying the group, it appears as if a Telegram channel is the only way to do it, as the situation is deteriorating rapidly. So, as far as I understand the situation, the Ukrainians got some purchase on the east bank of the Dnipro River, or in this exact place is actually the south bank, but you get the meaning. On the left bank of the Dnipro, which is why you use left and right, because when rivers meander, of course, compass directions aren't quite so useful. So on the left bank of the Dnipro, as the river flows, you've got this activity here. The Ukrainians have got a foothold. Now, the Russians were literally calling for airstrikes on them here with like FAB 500s, which would be really useful to take them out. It appears that there's some serious electronic warfare and jamming going on here for comms, and the Russians are unable to call through for help. And this is why they say, if necessary, all available information as well as the coordinates of enemy concentration sites are ready to be transmitted via any convenient communication channel. In other words, help us. We're not getting any assistance with being able to hit the Ukrainians here. No report says interesting update from Russian Channel 2 majors about the situation on the left bank near the Antonovsky Bridge. The enemy holds a small foothold on our coast for at least 3 days. The units of the Russian armed forces withdrew from the area as the constant action of enemy artillery and special forces of the enemy created a threat of encirclement of our forces. They retreated with battles. Neighbouring units came to the rescue. As a result of the fighting, the Russian armed forces suffered losses. At 6 o'clock last night, the enemy, with forces of up to 50 people, operates on our territory in the dark, builds up a group of supplies and supplies it with ammunition and technical equipment, trying to expand the zone of control. A short distance across the water, up to 1 kilometer, does not allow prompt artillery strikes against enemy high-speed boats. And indeed, there's footage of these high-speed boats. Let's go and have a look at this, and you can see that part of the bridge, the kind of on-ramp to the bridge, as far as I understand it. And this is the area just by the river, where you've got Ukrainian forces moving around quite freely by the looks of it. This I think is a Russian drone looking at the Ukrainian forces, but I guess unable to call artillery onto them for whatever reason. It could also be that there isn't the artillery in the area. There have been this explicit project of taking out or explicitly taking out Russian artillery systems and pieces right across the front line. We have seen numbers in the 40s on some days, but certainly from the teens to the early 40s, number of artillery we've seen taken out every single day, and that hurts eventually. And I think it's probably hurting around Kherson. I think it's been some time that they've been trying to take out artillery around Kherson, and that means that they aren't going to be as able to hit forces like these, and that's why probably they're trying to call in the aviation to do some of that work for them. This was some activity that's done the rounds. Seems that the information that Ukrainian forces had taken control of the bridgehead on the left bank of the Dnieper in the area of Antonivsky Bridge is confirmed. A Russian BTR-80 conducts sporadic fire in the direction of a possible landing of Ukrainian units. There are claims, actually not here, that you heard claims that maybe 50 troops. There are other claims that at least 100 troops are across. There's another claim that they've got 3 tanks across with ferries. So it could be that the Ukrainians really do have quite a significant chance of getting a decent foothold and moving on from there. Here we have the BTR coming in and firing. Remember, the tracer rounds it's not sporadic fire. I don't think this is fairly consistent. The tracer rounds are 1 in every maybe 4 rounds, 1 in every 3 or 4. So actually, this will be constant firing all the way down that kind of highway to the bridge. Just go and show you that soon, so you can see where that is. If we now come out, so this vehicle is driving down here, firing through the trees towards the settlement there, firing down the road and trying to take out some Ukrainians there. Now, as far as I understand it, this BTR was actually doing an evacuation, so came and evacuated Russian troops from the area and then basically skedaddled. And that shows that the Russians really are on the defensive here and are withdrawing under pressure from the Ukrainians. So that is pretty significant. So as you can see there, getting on board the Russian troops, and then 1 wounded, and then the BTR, whilst throwing out some suppressive fire, then sort of moves off elsewhere. So this is Russian drone footage as well. Okay, so that suggests that Kherson could be a viable point for the Ukrainians to pressure the Russians further. However, it's all going to be about how much equipment you can get across and how safely you can do that. Not all of this ground is particularly useful in terms of crossing with equipment. So if you get to somewhere like here, you're not really going to have the roads. It can be, some of these islands are boggy, marshy. Remember, it's just been flooded as well. So really, somewhere like this is going to be preferable. But if you're going to land everything there, then it might be like shooting fish in a barrel if the Russians have enough aviation support. So the FOB 500s would be really useful for them there, but other than that, tubed artillery. But it might be that they're just lacking tubed artillery in the area. Anyway, that is my summation of the front line. I hope that was useful to you. There's obviously more in the ISW and talking about the Antonivsky Bridge, but nothing I haven't already told you. So thank you for watching. Please like, subscribe, and share. I'll try and keep you abreast of any news throughout the day if there's anything major. But in the meantime, I will speak to you soon for my update extra.